Morning, everybody. I'm here to introduce Mr. Vusi Mthombeni. Vusi started off in KZN. I think he was born up in Jazini, and he did his BSc and honours in the University of Zululand. He did a variety of freelance work after graduating with honours in KZN parks with turtles and crews, the coastal unit up there as well. He joined SAIAB in 2001 as a collections officer, so he worked in the collections for a while, and eventually ended up as a collection manager. During that time, he did his master's in the Cederberg with 2 Austraglanus catfishers, with Olaf Vale and myself. In 2008, he moved across into DEDEAT in the Eastern Cape as an aquaculture researcher, and he had interesting opportunities. I think he visited China, and he did a whole range of aquaculture work all over South Africa as part of that work. And he was also involved in Walter Sisulu with supervising a range of aquaculture students there. In 2018, Vusi moved across to DEDAT. Can't keep track of all these acronyms. He's now the freshwater ecologist there, and he's involved in quite a range of activities, from fisheries in freshwaters to marine fisheries, also with interesting things like working on the white-winged flufftail, which is probably South Africa's rarest bird, which is really interesting. I'm coming to visit you to see that. He's a SAIAB research associate. He's been involved with freshwater research with us for quite a long time. He's also involved with all the permitting within the Eastern Cape, so he's a very helpful person to know as well. Vusi is going to talk to us today about co-management in marine nearshore fishery. So welcome, Vusi.
Thank you, Roger, for a nice introduction. I want to greet the colleagues, and it's my pleasure that I'm here to give my talk. One thing that I need to say straight away is that most of the time when you find people having to give talk, there's that level of being nervous, and then you find them, they will start kind of breaking the ice just to ease the pressure of that. But this time around, we're going to break the ice, not because I'm nervous here. I mean, you've heard in my biography. The breaking the ice is for strategic purposes, since today's presentation was precipitated by the symposium that was held here at SAIAB, where our students who are supervised by SAIAB NRF, they gave their presentation on the status of the aquatic ecosystems. So talking about that, actually, let me, okay, so, okay. Sorry about that. I wanted to get the slide going. So as I'm breaking the ice, it's just that there was our chief scientist in the coastal science, Professor Alan Whitfield, in his closing remarks, after we have heard that our aquatic ecosystems are in an appalling situation, he made a strategic kind of a slide just being presented. So I took it as it is. What he said, one thing that we need to do in order to have these aquatic ecosystems providing the ecosystem services to us is that we need to have to kind of safeguard these ecosystems. And then he had 5 thematic areas. And as you can tell, it was such a short meeting, but presenting this, I think it's a work that can need at least a week to go deeper into it, because this is a very serious matter if we were to have a human species surviving on Earth for the few decades or for the few centuries to come. So if you look at number 1, in fact, I'm not making his presentation, but it's just to keep, as I was saying, I need to get you in the right channel, as we are different stakeholders here, is that the thematic area of number 1 and 2 is talking largely on what the government, I mean, I presume that you're going to read, what is the work that is not necessarily in the hands of SAIAB, but it's a work that the government departments, they are kind of expected to do, even do it more in a way, so as to have other institutions surviving. So this is the kind of work that we need to do. So apparently there will be more focus on the law enforcement and I mean the capacity building around that. That is thematic area number 1. Thematic area number 2, we need to have the implementation of this environmental legislation and the rehabilitation processes in place. So government is the key stakeholders in this phase 2. If you take now the last 3, it's more kind of integration. I mean, as much as the government is involved, that is where we are seeing the relaxation, or so whereby other stakeholders, they need to come on board and then they work on this thing. But the most importantly, I mean, maybe I can just talk a little on number 3, because it's not only about people who are employed in an environmental management field. It's every household, no matter whether you are we are employed, you are not employed. If you are in an employment, if you are talking issues that are kind of I mean, 3 and 4, basically, particularly I'm referring to number 4, the issues of global climate change. It's a responsibility of everyone in every sector. You can talk of the supply chain management, they're obliged to do something on this. So it's a work that really integrates us all. So I thought this was very important that I highlight as a breaking ice. But most importantly, when he was mentioning that we need to conduct socio-ecological studies in estuaries and communicate this finding to both the government and the local communities. I think when at this point I was saying it, I then thought, in fact, I remember sitting with the professor, these 2 professors, that is Alan Whitfield and Albert Chakona. We sat at a table and then I said to them, well, guys, if you offer me an opportunity to come and present what I have done in this regard, you won't regret. And then out of that, then I also want to mention that I'm not the only person who has done this kind of work. Our next door, the Nelson Mandela University, we have Professor Janine Adams, who has supervised a PhD study looking at Swartkops, which was more, the research was more on the socio-ecological studies. They were looking at the framework called socio-ecological systems, and as to how the systems can be resilient to the pressures that are caused by human beings, and also the pressures that are caused by natural phenomena like the climate change that I've just spoken about earlier on. So they were looking at that. In order for us to survive, we need to have resilience ecosystems, and there's that research that I would perhaps encourage that way. Perhaps one day we get that presentation in this kind of platform. It hasn't taken place. I mean, I'm sure they will be very much happy, where you will compare the framework that was used by those colleagues against the framework that I'm presenting it today. My framework is called co-management, of which it is based on what we call stakeholder theory. You will hear more about that. But what it does is that the stakeholder management theory, it's all about having stakeholders as diverse as we are, kind of drawing a value or by kind of having our interest being catered for. For instance, I'm making an example. You guys at SAIAB or guys at Rhodes University or any other university, if we are dealing with fisheries, for instance, your main interest is to conduct research. And then you come to us as government, our main interest is about conservation. And then you go to the the local communities, their interest is livelihood. That would involve harvesting fish for food and also to kind of generate some income there. And then we also talk about other organizations like the World Bank. Their interest is to come and see where they can fund any development around this vicinity. So, I mean, with this variety of interests, so it's very important. I mean, the stakeholder theory assists us to kind of see how we can draw value, because our values are different, but the most unifying matter is the natural resource that, I mean, we have to kind of look after. So as you were coming here, you were asking yourself, why was this study undertaken? So which, I mean, that is a very good question. If you were to kind of look what is going on in the public domain, for instance, it could be the newspapers, the internet, the televisions, the radios, you hear about the conflicts that are taking place in the Wild Coast between government and the resource users. I can just cite 3 examples, for instance, in fact, which ended up getting into the court. And in each of the examples, the court made its ruling in favor of the local communities. There was incidents where communities were found fishing in the nature reserve without a permit. And then when that matter was taken in the legal route, it appeared that those people were exercising their customary right, and then they had to continue doing that. So that was the judgment that we're sitting in. In a way, I mean, one stakeholder, what I'm just presented, is that it's being compromised, because if a species can go extinct, there is no way you can kind of bring it back. I mean, we know it's a story from dodo, even if you are not a biologist, but you have heard sometime the extinction of a dodo. We always hear about it, but we are unfortunate to see it because there was no conservation that was taking place. Then you also find that at some point, people in the Wild Coast, there was a mining that the government had decided to get it established. It was going to be an Australian mine, but unfortunately, it didn't take place as the government had planned, because the communities, they felt that the establishment of the mine was going to impact negatively on the ecosystem services that they were deriving from the natural ecosystem. As a result, I mean, again, in that conflict, the court also ruled in favor of the people. We also found that there was also an oil and gas exploration in the Wild Coast that was proposed by government, in which the local communities and conservation activists, they also took the matter to court, saying that, I mean, that initiative was going to impact negatively on the fisheries, because sometimes you'll find that the fisheries can be spawned in the sea and then they come to the estuaries to feed and so forth. But that oil and gas exploration would impact negatively on the breeding of those species and the recruitment. Since, I mean, it was kind of a controversial matter according to the people who were involved in the fight, in the sense that, I mean, the local communities had received some kind of fishing rights. So they were saying maybe if this exploration was to go on, there was going to be a challenge when it comes to issues of them exercising the fishing, which, I mean, their livelihood were dependent on. So here is not a question of who wins at the court, who doesn't win at the court. That is not the matter. The matter here is a conflict that is there, because if the people, as they have won there in their context, I mean, the court has made a judgment. That's what we appreciate. But the challenge now with that is that the conflict that is there are certain stakeholders that are not happy. So the resources themselves, their conservation, their long-term impact is kind of doomed going forward. So these are the things, like, for instance, if you were to kind of explore other management options that are there, so that these different stakeholders with multiple interests, different interests, they can kind of come together, and then they kind of see how they can best meet each other. Because no matter if, say, I'm making an example, if, say, government one day, you know, the rules, they can be kind of reviewed, and at some point, say, for instance, there is a certain piece of legislation that is enabling that, yes, the government should be the one kind of winning. Remember the illegal fishing, the poaching that is taking place. If people, they cannot find value in these resources. So it means that there's a challenge in a way that what government is trying to protect is actually being destroyed somewhere in a way that they cannot even manage. Because one thing that I know is that if you are dealing with a human being can get sick, and then they cannot patrol in certain times, or sometimes there are public holidays, sometimes there are holidays. I mean, the sea or the coastal environment is such a wide environment, so they can kind of patrol a portion. But if people themselves, everyone is against the poaching, I think that is where we can kind of win the battle. So that is where the argument is on what I'm presenting. So in so doing, anyway, we're finding that actually, as a government, I mean, as I'm coming from government, we have a role to play in a way to kind of coming with a solution in this. I mean, it's not a one-way straight line solution, but we need to kind of come up with a solution that is going to address this complex of things so that we have our resources protected. But one thing that I also need to mention is that we do have co-management being mentioned under the small-scale fisheries policy, where they are envisaging that it is a tool that can help the fishing communities to be empowered to participate with government in developing, implementing, and evaluating fisheries policies and management plan. That is what in the policy it's saying. So, I mean, what I'm presenting to you here is in line with what the country has gazetted at some point. And then the question now is co-management feasible for the wild coast? Because we know from the literature that co-management has yielded different outcomes in different parts of the world. So it's nice and good to put this thing in paper, but I mean, you need some kind of evidence to kind of, because you are talking of some transactions, some resources that you will have to kind of spend in doing this. Sometimes you might be doing something that's not going to work. So as I proceed, I know I've said we are different stakeholders. Perhaps it's just to get you now well geared in the content of my talk. There are a few terminologies that I need to just quickly run through with you. First of all, we have got a concept called ecosystem approach to fisheries. This concept originates from the Faculty of Science, Fisheries Science to be exact, and it was kind of adopted by the FAO and us as well. In South Africa, we adopted it in those years, 2002. And what it says is actually it strives to balance diverse societal objectives by taking account of the knowledge and uncertainty about abiotic and human components of ecosystems and their interactions, and applying an integrated approach to fisheries within ecologically meaningful boundaries. And then it's further saying it aims to achieve sustainable fisheries using ecological sustainability of fish stocks and socio-economic viability of the fishing sector. The challenge here is that every time they were talking about fisheries or fisheries management, they kind of looking at a single species. If we say, for instance, we are exploiting tuna, they always think, well, we need to protect tuna, but to catch a single specimen of that species, you kind of catch a number of other, even thousands of other unintended species, and then that original way of dealing with managing a single species has been kind of unsuccessful. So this ecosystem being robust like this, in fact, I was meant to talk more about it later on in the presentation, but due to time factor, it could be a subject of another day. Also, another thing, what comes from the Faculty of Commerce, particularly under economics, is a concept called the tragedy of the commons, which is about, you know, if you have got open source resources, in other words, the natural resources that are available to everyone, if you do not have regulatory measures that are put in place, though you will find some individuals who are greedy and who would want to exploit them quicker in a way that before others they can exploit. So if you don't have regulatory measures in place, so you will have the extinction of those resources in future. So I mean, there's this concept as well. And now in a way, what I'm kind of doing here is also more kind of enlightening on that. So again, if we are dealing with the small scale fisheries management, it's within the law context. There is a theory called the theory of common property right. And then particularly for the small scale fisheries, what they are using under co-management is what they call is a communal property. I mean, there are others as well, but just in this case, since I mean, this subject is all about that. So what this law is about is that it gives access to the resource certain individuals while it prevents others from accessing. So there's that kind of system that you are dealing with. In a way, if you are, as I'm talking now, a conservation language, so you cannot talk conservation language if you are not touch-basing these things. But having said that, we are seeing that the original, as I was mentioning earlier on, the government top-down management approach has not been successful because with the small-scale fisheries, we are dealing with the socio-economic context, we are dealing with the socio-political context, we are dealing with the cultural dynamics. So, it's quite a complex. So you do need this insight in one way or another because it's a complex matter. So in a way, one of the concepts that is widely used is a co-management, and there is no universal definition of co-management, but the definition that is, one that one can also rely on, particularly Robert Pomeroy has done was one of the popular authors in this kind of subject, co-management of small-scale fisheries. Anything that comes from him, it's going to leave you with an understanding what's going on. So I like this definition where he's kind of defining co-management as a partnership arrangement whereby the community of local resource users, the government, and other stakeholders, they share the authority and responsibility for the management of the resource. And then others, just since I'm making a presentation, just not to bore you. So others, they have kind of putting it nicely. They're saying co-management is the sharing of responsibility and the task. And then they're kind of giving us a nice diagram that is showing one side, the authorities, the other side, the Fisheries Association. In the South African context, we can talk of the fisheries cooperatives because that's what we have currently. So, there is that fishing rights being given by authorities, and then the Fisheries Association, they are also kind of involved in the resource management responsibility. That is how they understand co-management, which is another version of what I was presenting earlier on. And then the question now becomes, why co-management? According to the FAO, they mention from the literature, they are published work, scholar work. So there are 5 main things that when we were kind of doing this kind of work, we found that the FAO is recommending the co-management on. First of all, it is important, it is recommended for achieving the FAO goals of fisheries management guidelines by bringing change in institutional policy and regulatory framework. As I'm mentioning this thing, you need to also go back to what I was saying earlier on, the issue of stakeholder theory. So the bullet number, this sub-bullet number 1, it's giving some kind of interest, it's fulfilling interest of someone else who didn't have that interest. So you just have to note that. And then in fact, every point, these sub-points, they're going to talk about the interest of someone else. The second point says, helping advance gender equity and human rights. And then the third point, strengthening the tenure rights and decision-making processes, thereby achieving increased and more equitable shared economic benefits. Point number 4, providing a strong institutional structure as sustainable, equitable, and efficient fisheries management strategy. And point number 5, achieving the goals of the ecosystem approach to fisheries as a governance model. So that's what, according to FAO, that's what they are recommending this co-management for. But there are those scholars also who have, outside FAO, who have also published work, sort of like citing that co-management is also important to address the sustainable development goals. And then they're mentioning sustainable goals according to their numbers as they appear here. Goal number 14, goal number 1, goal number 2, goal number 5, goal number 8, goal number 17. But I like the goal number 17 because it's all about partnership of which, that's what the stakeholder theory is about, and that's what we are trying to achieve here is about. So having kind of talked these 2 main bullets, there are 2 things that I want you kind of draw attention on here, is that there are scholars who have documented that co-management tends to differ from one continent to another. And they are citing that if you are in the African continent, the countries of this continent, they start co-management so as to deal with the challenges of conflict. But if you go to Europe, they're starting co-management so as to advance the goals of sustainability. So you can say that if you were to kind of deal with the co-management, it's kind of site-specific. So that's one thing, and then some kind of, it's not kind of, we are dealing with a straightforward kind of situation. A second point is that, that I wanted to draw your attention on. There are scholars who have studied co-management as a whole. and they've critiqued it very severely, saying that co-management in the real world does not exist because it is founded in the positivism ideology, in which the information that is used there is derived from the fisheries science. And the countries that are funding the fisheries science, they have got a strong influence on what goes to co-management. If co-management was to be a real thing, it should be founded in an interpretivism ideology in which the lived experiences of people and its traditional leaders could be the one that is informing or that is informing the decision making. So with that, I mean, because I've actually, this work that I'm presenting, I did it for as a master's study. So with that, I have to defend if there are these people, what is my drawing in that? So my conclusion. So the conclusion was that given that the literature is telling us that there are sites or there are areas in which co-management has been a success, so here we should go forward and then evaluate if co-management is going to be successful in the Wild Coast. And then people can ask why the Wild Coast. It was the former republic in South Africa that was everything, all the laws were different to the laws of South Africa. But when at the dawn of democracy, it was incorporated into the into South Africa. So the fisheries regulatory laws, they had to be adjusted later. So that's one thing. And also the Stats SA have also documented that there is a highest level of illiteracy there. There is also highest level of poverty, and those things, I mean, they kind of exist there. It's something I want you to note that, because at the end of my presentation, I'm going to talk more about that at this point. Again, I mean, we know that it is the world's most spectacular coastline. In fact, it's one of the global biodiversity hotspots. And also other research studies that they have documented unique or distinct fisheries species assemblages and genetic component in there. So in a way that the Wild Coast can be assigned a distinct marine bioregion. And then now coming to the methodology, I mean, I'm now caught up with that. I'm now going to kind of talk that the research took or was founded in the what we call post-positivism ideology. So I mean, this ideology is kind of, if we were to look at the continuum, one side of the continuum, you would find, for instance, what we call a positivism research paradigm. And then the opposite end of that, we're going to find what we call interpretivism research paradigm. Then in the middle of those two continuum, you will then find what we call post-positivism. In the positivism, let me quickly explain. In the positivism is where faculties like of science, sometimes there's the accounting that's field, you would find them sitting in there in a way that you will find that everything that you deduce there, it's universally agreed upon. Say, for instance, if you're saying you studied a fish and then you use a Recker's catch curve to estimate natural mortality of that species, no one is going to question why did you use that catch curve, because it's universally known. And then the results there, I mean, they are kind of universally agreed upon, whatever that you're going to find, because usually it's a quantitative kind of research where you're dealing with numbers, information, whatever things that you generate, you find yourself having a data comprising of numbers, that kind of thing. So the qualitative research that's taking place there. But on the other side of the continuum, the opposite side is more kind of, I wouldn't say per se subjective, but is an opposite of the objectivism. So whereby the information actually is being derived from the experiences, the perceptions, the ideas. I mean, in a way that the data that you collect, you find there is a data in the form of a text. So you have to understand, you read the text, you understand, and so forth. And then that form takes the qualitative research approach. So And then now in the middle, that is where you kind of find this post-positivism. So in the post-positivism, anything that you do, I mean, you can deduce from what I'm presenting, the co-management, there are many theories in there. So if I'm kind of talking co-management, I need to convince a reader why co-management, what are the ideas out there, what are the agreeable conditions, what are disagreeable conditions. So I'm drawing to the fact that this research, we kind of founded it in a sphere that is more kind of debatable, in a way that you need to justify each and every point that we have taken. So anyway, so in that, so here at the business school, there's a colleague there who kind of had studied that, I mean, this post-positivism, I mean, if one is doing it, it can kind of have a deductive approach whereby you can use a theory to kind of deduce your research themes. So, I mean, in this study as well, so this is what we had done. So there are further other authors, they are further saying that there is within this knowledge paradigm, you'll find that accuracy, sound reasoning, and production of evidence are central to this post-positivism, and as the truth is bound by context and human interaction and human action interaction. So I have to interview people to get the data. So apparently what had happened is that I used the semi-structured interviews, having identified 7 themes. And then, I mean, they are further saying that the semi-structured interviews, they are beneficial because they can provide information on the lived experience of the participant while addressing the researcher's theoretically driven variables of interest. So that's what I did. So there were 11 respondents, I mean, in a broader sense, some were coming from government, others from university, others from non-profit organization, and the fishermen from different sides of the wild coast. So this is what we did. And then, actually, I know I'm kind of jumping the gun, but one thing I need to quickly highlight here is that this approach that I did, I mean, it's kind of is widely used, but someone challenged me saying that apparently, because this is a top-down approach whereby you have your theory and then now you're going to kind of use theory to deduce your themes. So in a way, you formulate the research question out of your themes to probe the people, their kind of understanding and so forth. So they were saying the research should kind of employ what we call inductive approach, where you just formulate your questions, you go and ask people the questions, and then from their answers or from the data, you then work your way up to theory. So there are these 2 schools of thought. It's something to kind of note. But noting that, I mentioned to you that there are scholars who are questioning this core management. So for me, my personal opinion, I felt that what I did was the right thing. There's nothing I can change if I was to be given a second chance to do this, because I'm working in a space where there's no universally agreed kind of ideas. So there was also the data we used, thematic analysis. I mean, the Brown and Clark's work or methodology is the one that was kind of followed. I mean, if you are doing this, you kind of have what we call, you have to be blessed with the reading and understanding, because it involves, first of all, these authors really recommend that if possible, you should be the one who is collecting the data. It becomes difficult if someone else has collected the data. So at least you are familiar with what is going on. And then out of that, you can then start kind of working on, but it involves a lot of reading and reasoning and so forth. But this is kind of one of the most difficult part, particularly if we have never done it before. Sort of like there's a lot of things that involved in there. But coming now to the results, I mean, I'm kind of rushing, but things, I'm going to get to where I want to be at. So having questioned the people, they talk their perspective. So in summer, there was a positive outcome on what I was researching on, in that first people, they understood, all of them, they understood co-management as a partnership that would involve different stakeholders. And then there was also, I mentioned that every people, they could benefit from co-management, but there were different benefits identified. For instance, the local fishermen, they said co-management would assist them to achieve fishing rights. Other stakeholders, they noted that it would assist with as a self-regulatory means. Other people, they saw it as a good for information sharing. Other people, they saw as important to eliminate the illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. So there were these different kind of benefits identified. But if I was to go to the literature, I mean, just quickly, they were mentioning that this point, it clearly tells that people, when they're coming as different stakeholders to co-management, they're having these different ideas. And these different ideas, if we do not hold regular meeting to kind of work our ways up, we will kind of have conflict in the future. So when it's something worth noting. So in a way, people, they said, all of them, they would recommend co-management. Without any information on a balance sheet, when people, they are mentioning that they can benefit, they can all benefit. Secondly, they can all recommend. So it's an indication that overall, the cost of running co-management will be far less than the achievement. So, I mean, if you go to the literature, Robert Pomeroy and the colleagues, because they were studying in the Asian countries, they noted that if you're having a situation like this, in fact, they were using a qualitative approach. They concluded that is an indication of a successful co-management in that region that you were studying at. And a similar result as well, they were using this time quantitative research or approach in KZN, co-management of small-scale fisheries. They also arrived to the same conclusion. So indirectly here, it was kind of echoing that co-management of the wild coast was viable. And then, unfortunately, as I've mentioned, with this kind of work, we are kind of, if we are seeing an object being presented to you by the same people at the same place at the same time, not all of us are going to see the same kind of issue or same whatever thing that you're perceiving. We perceive things differently. So different benefits of co-management, I mean, were noted, whereby the people were kind of on the benefits as I've alluded on. So people were perceiving different benefits. And also, there was also different perception on whether government should be the key stakeholder in co-management or not. There were also kind of different opinion whether government's involvement of community in decision-making when they are engaging with the wild coast is adequate or not. And there was also the differences whether there was a gender equity or not. There was also difference in the diversity of ethnicity in those results of people who are exploiting resources over there. But what we are seeing here from the previous slide, people being more kind of having the same perception and also people having different perceptions. So we need to kind of address these different perceptions so that we have got a common ground to work on. So as I'm discussing now, it's nearing the end. So the common end, the common denominator here, everyone wants fish to be protected. But again, how do we protect fish? I mean, if you remember what was happening, I presented earlier on, there were those who have got fishing rights. They believe that you can go and fish as much as you want. So that's I mean, to them, sort of like as much, the fish is important, but how to kind of keep it kind of for future generations, the ideas are not the same. So there was also common kind of perception on, actually with the, what I've presented, the common perceptions, that one we can kind of develop common vision to build trust and relationship. And then from there, there are a few things that we can do. First, now that we know co-management is viable, so we need as government, particularly the DFFE, have government-led multi-stakeholder initiative in that we kind of gonna have to look at things like integrated resource management strategy, because what we see is that there is a level whereby if people are hungry, people are illiterate. In other countries where co-management was started, it was undermined when people are kind of living in poverty. So those things needs to be addressed. So we need to embrace the sustainable livelihood approach, so where these social ills can be kind of tackled. And we also need to invest in the organizational capacity building. I'm going to talk about that in the next slide more. And then we also need to have those shared understanding of co-management. I mean, the local communities, they need to be involved, but most importantly, the issue of language, people, they needed to be addressed in their own languages. So the roles and responsibility of all the stakeholders involved in here are so important. So I want to end here by kind of showing you what we call the model that FAO has piloted in Asian countries, where, I mean, the model appeared to be functioning, but one thing that needs to happen is that the government, it needs to embrace political and social framework to support the development of the communities. So the model comprises 5 steps. So the initial step with it that can take you a year to do, if I can run quickly with it, is that you have to contact with the fishers, and then you kind of do the socio-ecological surveys. In fact, let me kind of do like this. Yeah, you do the socio-ecological services, and then there is a participatory rural appraisal, SLA surveys. There is a co-management feasibility study, there's a target selection, staff training, environmental surveys. I highlighted this because they are mainly more into the organization that I'm working for currently. And then there's a fishing gear and aquaculture survey. So in this model, they developed it while they were doing fisheries for the lagoon and also the aquaculture. So, I mean, if you read from this model, you can see that some of the things we have done in the country, others are still missing. But I mean, just to kind of get this thing the way it is, we can do it within a year. And then the second year, again, for a period of a year, we have got what they call it inception stage, where, I mean, you mobilize the fishing association, you hold meeting with them. Currently, I mean, the meetings are being held in the Wild Coast for this small-scale fishing. And then you mobilize and then you establish their board. I mean, there are already fishing cooperatives available. You do the awareness, or you are raising awareness to the fisheries. I mean, something that is happening already. There is also Fisheries Association, a charter that to be developed. There's executive board and subgroup establishment. In fact, the DFFE and other stakeholders, they are doing some work on that. And there's also, you formalize everything, and then you hold meetings and congresses, and then you involve the traditional leaders as well. So, and then for the period of, say, about 3 or 4 years, then you kind of do what we call the planning stage, where you have got the community, kind of, you map thoroughly your communities, you develop the strategies through stakeholder mobilization. There's a lagoon management regulation, water surface demarcation. I mean, I'm sure the Department of Water and Sanitation here could be on board, but I didn't want to label other departments' role. But anyway, there's a zoning of plans, there's a user fee development, a patrolling team. So these ones, they could work with government because we've already got the stakeholders working in that already. So there's the development of co-management body, and then there's a fishing right allocation. Here in South Africa, we've already got this fishing right allocated to people. So, I mean, then if we go to the implementation phase, I mean, going onward, you find that, okay, you will have a user gear and registration, the patrolling and management, the gear rearrangement, the environmental conservation. This is very critical because usually, you know, like there's this tendency that environmental management is a component of researchers from government, institutions of higher learning and so forth. But apparently here, you will find that in other countries, you will find the people themselves, they're involved in that. Like, for instance, I'm making an example. If people, they were overfishing, and then you collect data with them, whatever biological data or about the species that you collect, and then you come to them, and then you run the kind of analysis, and then it's going to tell you the possibility of extinction of that species and so forth. You read with the people, and then you ask the people, if, say, for instance, because now we know in a decade, this species, the population of the species will be no more, what do you think we should be doing? You hear from them rather than me as a government coming with that kind of information. So it's something that I wanted to say, to talk about. So, I mean, we kind of getting this fisheries activities going on the pilot project, and then you meet, and then you discuss in the form of congresses, and these processes will go on. I mean, where you are doing the monitoring, so you kind of develop the criteria, and then you have got the framework in place, you kind of develop them some schedule, working with the people, and then some kind of implementation of that monitoring and evaluation, and then you do those feedback to the Fisheries Association or Fisheries Cooperatives. So anyway, this is where the presentation is ending. It's a few kind of references, but it's just to mention that this talk, as I was saying earlier on, it was precipitated by the workshop that we had. Anyway, I said, if I come and present, I mean, you won't regret. I don't know whether my promise was met. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vusi. Anybody got any questions?
Thank you for the presentation. It's really interesting because, as you have already mentioned, the co-management is not being practiced in many African countries. So one question that I want to ask is, where will the grievance redress mechanism will fall in the model? Because I believe that, as you have already mentioned also, there are a lot of, debatings among whether the management will start from top to down or down to top. So if there is any grievance from the community about the management system that's already on the ground, which is the co-management, and they want to report and make change and they want to report to the government. So I feel like there should be some kind of grievance redress mechanism committee that could help to the management to improve or strengthen the management system. I haven't seen it, so where will it fall?
Thank you for the question. In fact, I presented the model as it is coming from the publication. I can kind of not wanna speculate, because as I'm kind of presenting it, it must be a kind of a co-development strategy in a way, because as it is here, there are things that we perhaps are going to see you can adapt to fit those local conditions, that kind of a thing. So in a way, they cannot be kind of a straight answer straightly to that. So it's a question that all the stakeholders that I highlighted are implicated here. It's something that we can kind of put it into them. Where do they think it falls? And then someone would kind of say this falls here, others they say not here. And then we debate depending on who can debate better than the other. And then we can get an answer from there. Yeah.
So do you have any prescriptive measures on how this co-management system that you are suggesting can streamline conflict resolution? Because you have highlighted various stakeholders with various interests. What happens in the case where there is a stalemate? Who makes the final decision? And in the case that the community's needs are at loggerheads with other important stakeholders, who then would be forefronted, whose interests would be at the forefront in the final decision?
Yeah, actually, well, let me put it this way. we do need government at the end of the day, no matter what the conditions are. Anyway, the fact that we do have these associations, we do have the platforms where people they meet, where these all stakeholders they meet. Like for instance, say we have a symposium with the academy, or all the stakeholders that I've mentioned. They because this what is being is suggested by the research is that it's a kind of a long-term kind of thing. So as this thing is happening, we need to learn from one another. Even the government itself, it needs to learn how to work with the people, how to kind of, or how to best work with the people. Let me put it that way. Because apparently, you know, like with that top-down approach, the history of having top-down approach, you know, to relinquish those powers. I mean, people, we are not kind of not used into that. So there should be an investment going on, kind of research. How do we kind of go about, in a way, the decision on that should be taken by every stakeholder, not that perhaps government must have an upper hand. So it must be a collective idea. So that's where I see, in a way that if that idea, I would call it terms of reference of some sort. Maybe if say we have got the association or the core management committee, let me use that terminology. So the core management committee, it comprises, you know, like within each stakeholder, you will have representatives. Like say, for instance, for me, I might represent my organization. Someone else in the fishing corp might choose what do you call it, the chairperson of that co-op to go and represent their interests. Say, for instance, we've got 20 co-ops, so we've got 20 people representing different community fishing co-ops, so that kind of a thing. So any decision, because what is happening here, it's kind of trying to prevent someone else from kind of making a decision. If the terms of references, they are saying we will have to discuss, I mean, the government does not, if the government feels it wants to implement this, and then we as the communities, we are kind of, we have not agreed according to the terms of references. I mean, we need to go to the table, we then talk. That kind of, is that platform. So no, but it's a committee being represented by people from different stakeholders that should take the decision. Government being a member of that. But the role of government to protect its people, I cannot overemphasize, it's so crucial, even though maybe there could be areas that, I mean, the government can be a kind of criticized, they haven't had adequate consultation. These are the areas that we need to improve on, so that, as I was kind of saying, there will be kind of a need to train people how to deal with or capacitate. Like, I mean, for instance, you are a fisheries scientist, you must be capacitated how to deal, to raise your concern when we are with government stakeholders, when we are with the communities, that kind of thing. So, I mean, it's something that should be developed as we go along. But I know there will be teething problems with that.
How did you determine your sample size for your study? Because I'm also doing a socio-ecological study, and unlike animals, you're working with people. Does it depend on who's available to do the interviews? How did you determine that?
Okay, thanks. It's a nice question. So apparently from the literature, they are saying that if, say, I mean, this dissertation is available online at Rhodes University Library anyway, you can read about it. But straight to your question, is that usually there is, they're talking that if you have got a minimum of 6 people, if you kind of doing what we call a purposed sampling, where you target people who are knowledgeable. Say, for instance, there are other stakeholders who were directors at that level within whatever organization they were working on. So the information that you will get, that person's experience, in a way that, I mean, the person hasn't been just put in there, so has got a number of interaction, knows exactly what's going on, that kind of thing. So they were saying, if you do this purposed sampling, and then we've got a minimum of 6, that will cover you. But for me, I got the minimum, also, so I got the maximum of 11 people, which was good. Thank you for your presentation. I think in your presentation is said Africa starts co-management for resolving conflicts, but Europe for advancing the management. Do you believe Europe managing their resources well? Actually, yeah. That's why I asked you the question. Yes. Because fisheries has collapsed as a whole in the world. How can we say they started co-management for advancing the management, but Africans started to resolve the conflicts? Yeah, actually, that's what I've got from the literature that they were saying so. But what had happened? Because this what actually I have my reservation, and it says that I'm more kind of reluctant to give an answer. But if you were to kind of look at Europe at large, it has the history. I mean, I was looking at it at a political eye. It kind of, the colonization largely came from Europe, and then now, I mean, here, I mean, if you go to African countries or other countries, or so other continents. They were kind of colonized. So they were having their own way of doing things, traditional ways and so forth. And then after that, they kind of relinquished, or they did away with that, and then they kind of had a new way to adapt and so forth. So one of the sources of conflict can emanate from that. And then that side, I mean, the challenges, I mean, the socio-economic challenges that they are faced with, they may not be necessarily the way other countries are like. I mean, this is my personal kind of view. But what we are seeing is that with the population growth that is happening all around the world, as I was talking about the tragedy of the commons earlier on, you are kind of seeing, because the natural resources that we have, unfortunately, they cannot cope with this human kind of population growth. So we kind of, I'm making an example. The fact that today you are right, whatsoever, does not mean tomorrow will be right. So that's what, when I was reasoning, because they were kind of saying that, I mean, part of, if you were to get different outcomes, it could be, or it's kind of continent, the challenge of continents are not the same. So in a way, if you were to learn co-management, let's say, for instance, since it has worked in Europe, or one of the European countries, and then you go to Zambia, for instance, and then it doesn't work, and then you start wondering why. You use the same thing whatsoever. So the challenges of Zambia, the local communities, and the challenges of whatsoever in one of the European countries are not the same. So in a way, you are kind of mixing up things. So it was my own personal experience, but it's something that's documented. I can send you the thing.
Hi, Vusi. Thank you for the interesting presentation. So my question comes to the fact that I think you've already touched upon it, the fact that these resources that we're talking about are finite. There are a certain number of fish in the rivers, and as our human population grows, we just cannot sustain it. And there are biological processes, for example, particular target species will require a certain number of months to grow for it to reproduce and replace itself. So there are only a limited amount of resources you can extract from the environment. So I imagine most of these policies that the so-called top-down policies that are coming out were made with those sort of biological boundaries considered. So is there really, even if you do have a framework that democratizes the whole process of giving every stakeholder an opportunity to actually contribute to coming up with policy, at the end of the day, there is a finite amount of resources. So no matter how much we give everyone an opportunity to say, there are certain, what I would imagine are basic biological principles that need to be followed. So my question to you is, as personally, do you really think that even if everyone does get a voice to say, to have their piece when you come up with these policies, is it really going to change these conservation recommendations that are already there? Because if you're saying that we are going to put a no-catch period of or whatever number of months so that the fish actually have a chance to grow. That period, whether everyone has to say it doesn't change because the fish will still need that amount of time for them to recover. I don't know.
Oh, yes, thanks for the question. Yeah, what we are saying actually is 100% correct. We have got limited resources, and then we've got people growing in numbers, demanding more of these resources. But when it comes with fish, particularly once we have got this kind of conflict being resolved, like, I mean, we were talking of eliminating poaching, for instance. So that will have a significant improvement. But also, because this framework, the good thing about it, it talks about fisheries, it also talks about aquaculture. So in this coastal environment, it can also be seen to look at some of these species, they can do, or we can kind of get aquaculture, or produce them in a way, in the form of aquaculture, that kind of thing. But the point is, if, say, for instance, we come up with a solution that has minimized, say, poaching, say, by 80%, something that we can upload.
Last talk, Vusi, I was part of the team that did some of the socio-ecological systems work on the Sundays and the SWAT Corps.
Okay.
We have to share that. We created a big report, so I'm very happy to share that with you if you like.
Okay, great.
One of the things I think is really important when it comes to developing co-management is also to be cognizant of some long-term monitoring researches that can take place. So co-management is great, but like Tadi was saying, there's resources, especially in the estuaries, are so finite, and some of the estuary species are so resident. So if you take those fish out, then you're going to have limited recruitment coming back into the systems. So I think it's really important to get a better understanding of what the target species are, which ones might be able to sustain greater harvesting relative to others. Reducing poaching is great when you've got co-management, but it's not reducing the effort, because you're basically, you would change the term poaching to you can take out the resources. So essentially the draw from the resource wouldn't be reduced in any way. So you're just giving everyone a bit more access to things. But I think getting an understanding of what is there and how much you can draw from certain resources and how much is available at any given time would be really good to be able to sustain things a bit better in the long term.
Absolutely right. I fully agree with you, because what tends to happen is that here, I mean, what this co-management is saying is that we kind of, if something is being taken out of water, it must be recorded, it must be known. But now, in the absence of co-management, the way things are, there is so much that is being taken out of water without knowing, and that kind of thing. So sort of like we are trying to kind of work stepwise in a way that, as I was saying earlier on, that if you are a scientist going to work there, the local communities, they need to know, say, for instance, you are representing Rhodes University. They know Rhodes University in the co-management meeting of the natural resources. You know, so I know the challenge that we're having currently is that if you go to other places, I mean, they might not, the communities, they might just chase you away because they are saying we're now sick and tired whatsoever. But you must be known, even if they're having their community, yes, they have got their community meetings. Sometimes they should just ask you to come there, you listen, so that you are better informed what is going on in the law, in a way that you are not the one who will come up with this science. Remember that issue of they're saying you kind of bringing them information, yet they do have information, the long-lived information from their side. Yes, in a way, yeah.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I just want to know, like, within governments, who is the government primarily representing? Because even within governments, we have the different departments and they all have different values as well. So I just want to know, like, on the ground level, when you're having these discussions, are you having representatives from each department in these discussions, or who are they primarily representing the government in a broad?
Yes, thanks. Apparently, as we are dealing with fisheries, currently, I mean, it's a fisheries, we do have our lead agents, which is DFFE, Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. And then you then have, they call it sister departments, because actually fisheries, we cannot have fisheries when there is no water. So there should be somebody kind of representing water and sanitation. There is also other interested parties. And then there is also, I mean, the spheres of government, like I was talking about the national government, as now at the province level, we have a mandate to protect the environment in which the fish are living in. So, I mean, as I come as a government, sort of like I do have, yes, we do have these mandates, but sometimes they overlap somewhere. Because I mean, like, as I was talking, the Department of Water and Sanitation, if say, for instance, I was to pollute or to do something on the land, and then that thing ends up in water. So, I mean, even me from where I'm sitting, I can take that challenge and report it directly to water and sanitation, because they have got a legal right to take this matter up. Yet for me, it's kind of, we need to kind of work together. So there's that network interconnectedness. Some of that interconnectedness, we know about it. Others, they just happen that we haven't even identified that they are there. But we are kind of interconnected. So if we're talking government, like for instance, here, from my presentation, you can tell that as I'm talking fisheries, there's Department of Education here to address the issues of illiteracy, because in other countries, they've failed. So it's sort of like, it's a whole kind of network having these little pieces that we need to tie them together at the end.
Some online questions as well.
Okay.
Whilst you're fiddling with that, so presumably as you gather data from fisheries and you see how things are working, you're presumably going to change your management options. Now, how do you plan on informing stakeholders and the users of change? Do you think that's going to be a challenge? If you say you're supposed to take fish of a certain size and then 2 years later you say, no, we changed our mind, we're going to take them of a different size. Do you foresee challenges there, or is that going to be straightforward?
Actually, the manner in which actually it can happen is that first of all, you must go to the communities themselves, because it's a consultation. As I was kind of interviewing them, they were crying about the consultation, that they tend not to be consulted, and then all of a sudden, then they find that they've broken the rules, that kind of thing. So the main thing was that kind of connection, because as you come, yes, someone was saying there is a kind of public consultation that tends to happen where people, they must go and kind of have their views, and then there's a closing date for that. But apparently it doesn't, from what I get, that not every people are managing. I think it's a means of communication. I mean, our communication channels also need to be looked. So it's a variety of things. But from what I know, or from what they told me, is that they are willing to work with authorities, but it's just that they seem not to be given that space.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you don't foresee a challenge then?
No.
As long as you communicate.
Yeah, yes, as long as there is a communication. Yeah.
We've got some online questions. You want to read those, Vusi?
Okay.
Oh, you can't.
Okay.
Are there any current plans for government to have such studies from other provinces focusing on co-management strategies, and maybe continue them to get a broader sense how framework can work on a national level? Or is it just an Eastern Cape study?
Okay. Apparently, what is happening, I'm now going to report what is happening actually in Port St. John's. They do have a co-management committee. Actually, DFFE is kind of hugely involved. So and other stakeholders like Abalobi, WWF, and the communities themselves. So the manner in which they were explaining it to me, they were saying that perhaps they are kind of using the Port St. John's as a way of starting point, which it can be rolled out to other provinces. So all the lessons learned from what is going on currently there. So they tend to be meeting now and again. So yeah, so I'm kind of seeing that, yeah, it's something that is in the pipeline.
Certainly there's scope for freshwater dams and lakes in South Africa to be co-managed all over the country.
Absolutely. Something that I didn't mention when I was presenting, I think it's my fault, is that as I was doing the literature search on co-management, they were saying this co-management it applies. It's not that it's maybe specific to coastal environment, the marine or the inland water bodies. It's something, if you get the concept right, you are interacting with the people. It's the same thing that when you develop your inland fisheries, you're going to apply the same approach. There is no difference between these water bodies, because we are dealing with the interaction of stakeholders for the management of the resource.
Vusi, good luck with this question. You mentioned in your results that gender equity was perceived as a form of discrimination. I'm curious as to how they perceived it inshore and offshore, because gender is such a broad aspect. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's because of I was pressed with time. I was going to say so that, I mean, sometimes I'm mindful of time. Sometimes you always say you don't want to end up taking hours. There's actually research done on that, on this one. I mean, in the African continent, they are saying that the women, they tend to exploit the near shore resources, that is the shellfish, and then where the men, they exploit the offshore, they go swim, that kind of thing. Because they are saying the fin fish that is being exploited by the men, they carry a higher monetary value compared to the shellfish. As a result, for women, because women, they have been marginalized, in order to keep women marginalized, they can use fisheries, or they have been using fisheries to exploit the fish of low income value so that they can be dependent on men. So it's a kind of an African thing.
Certainly you see that in freshwater fishing with a whole range of activities, and it's definitely sexually demarcated. Women will use certain baskets, and men will use other kinds of traps. It's quite distinct.
Yes.
I don't know the root of that, the reason for that, but it's definitely there.
Yeah, but this issue of having men kind of marginalizing women, I mean, I'm just kind of generalizing. I mean, it's something that, I mean, if you're reading literature, you find that it is there, and there have been structures in place to kind of make it happen, of which, I mean, this issue of fisheries, like, I mean, for example, here, from the publication, I can share you that publication. Even there were in one of the papers, I mean, it was written in the UKZN authors, they were saying that even, if you go for fishing, it's hot. I mean, men, they can kind of wear anyhow they want, just to accommodate the issue of sun, of weather. But when it comes to women, and then they start kind of having these unacceptable words, saying that a woman must wear up to a certain standard, that does not bring comfort to them. Sort of like they were saying, there's a lot of discrimination that's taking place in there.
So is this something that's discussed in, or will be discussed in your forum?
Is that yes, because apparently they once invited me to kind of share what I've gotten. So I mean, I mentioned, but yes, all the issues here, because the person who raised this issue of gender was a woman who was saying, I'm a fisherwoman, but the manner in which I'm marginalized, I mean, I can even swim and then collect fish surpassing the man, but I mean, I'm not given recognition. And that is what is a problem, of which if this study was to be kind of, there is something that one can learn. I mean, we need those things to be addressed whenever we kind of getting this thing going, if ever it gets going.
Okay, next question. Are there no overlaps with organizations, with the organization's co-management, and how do they ensure cooperation?
Mm.
Are there no overlaps with different organizations that are involved in co-management? And if so, how can you ensure cooperation? I'm guessing just through the forum that you were discussing.
Yeah, I know like what tends to happen is that you know, like perhaps you're gonna deal with a certain community or certain the different communities in that particular area. So the challenges that they have are not going to be the same, like for instance, the challenges other communities as well are having. I'm gonna make an example. Say, for instance, us here in this room, we are a fishing, sorry, we are the fisher people, let me put that way. And we are, maybe 1/3 of us are exploiting seaweeds. The other, well, the other third is exploiting shellfish. The other third maybe is kind of exploiting. Oh, I mean, let me explain this way. In shellfish, say, for instance, someone is dealing with the mussels, making example, then the other one perhaps is dealing with the rock lobster. So, I mean, we are having got each one of us, we are having a co-management of that fishery that we are exploiting. You may find that within us here, coming from the same village, there will be a group that will have a successful co-management over the other, because our kind of background, our lived experiences, our challenges as we are doing this work are different. So there is also literature that has been saying, yes, the fact that someone else is successful somewhere in a particular fishery does not guarantee that our problems here is going to be successful as well. So there is such a difficult environment, sort of like you kind of have to keep debating, yeah, and also the skill, I think, within your committee, your members, because people, they have got different ways how to deal with the conflict, how to mobilize themselves. So the manner in which we mobilizing us can be different to that one. So I mean, yeah, so it's a world that is not so easy to live with, so to say.
Okay, so somebody's asking for the references slide again. I'm assuming we're going to share this this talk, so you'll be able to get that. Next question, is there a perception from communities that certain engagement is not acceptable or considered as poor? For example, social media communications versus in-person meetings. In-person meetings seem to be the only acceptable form of engagement currently in South Africa.
Yes, that one also, there was a question that was, as I was questioning them. So people, they were saying we need to try and have kind of either there's this online virtual and also in person, sort of like they were saying some people, they would be comfortable kind of if you are one-on-one. Others, they will be comfortable when they are talking to you, maybe they don't see you. I mean, they kind of tend to give more information, more input, sort of like they were kind of saying, or the perception that we got was that we need to have all these kind of platforms being available.
Yeah. Yes, you're very quiet. Any questions?
There's a last question. Then we can wrap it up.
Okay. Is your government department involved in the implementation framework of inland capture fisheries policy? If yes, what are your mandates towards implementation of the policy? I think you are, aren't you?
Yeah, apparently what happened is that, make an example, we are actually, I mean, Department of Environmental Affairs, but there is that what we can call it cross-pollination. There is the national department. So like, for instance, they have to work with us in a way that sometimes, I mean, I know it's something, it's going to be more kind of developmental. So as they exploit, there's inland fisheries, there is impact that is going to take place within the environment. So us is more kind of supporting our I'll call it sister departments in doing that. So we are involved in a way. At some point, when Albert Chakona here, we visited SAIAB he was there, he accepted us. I mean, if they come to provinces, they met with me and then they asked me to take them to institutions that are doing work either directly or in. And then we met and then they talked the message that they were kind of up to, sort of like they were visiting all the provinces. So they were kind of saying, well, there should be something that we co-develop as various stakeholders. So there was that meeting that we took that had taken place. So yes, there is an involvement that we kind of have.
Okay, Vusi, thank you very, very much. There's lots of interest in this subject, isn't there? With more questions. Well done. Thank you.